The silence in our house after Emily died wasn't just an absence of her laughter, or the melody she hummed constantly, a tune for every mood. It was a physical presence, a heavy cloak that settled over everything, muting colors, dulling sounds. For 18 months, Lily and I had navigated this new, quiet world, our routines a fragile scaffold built over an abyss of grief. Lily, at 5, was a resilient little sprout, her smile sometimes so radiant they almost fooled me into believing the sun could truly shine again. I, an architect by trade, found solace in the order of lines and measurements, a stark contrast to the chaotic disarray of my inner world. My work, designing structures meant to last, felt like a small act of defiance against the impermanence that had shattered my life. It was a Tuesday, I remember, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, dust motes dancing in the beams, one of those ordinary moments that life, even after tragedy, continues to offer. Lily was at her small table, crayons scattered like fallen petals, humming a tune that was definitely not one of Emily's. She was chattering away, a one-sided conversation full of giggles and earnest explanations. This wasn't unusual. Imaginary friends were, according to every parenting book I'd devoured in a panic after Emily's death, a normal part of childhood development. "Who are you talking to, Sweet Pea?" I asked, stirring milk into my coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. Lily looked up, her brow furrowed in concentration as she added a vibrant purple streak to what looked like a lopsided giraffe. "Sarah," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She says the giraffe needs sparkly wings, Daddy." "Sarah, huh?" I smiled. "Does she like purple sparkly wings?" "Oh yes," Lily nodded sagely. "Sarah likes all the sparkly things, just like Mommy did." A small pang, sharp and familiar, pierced through me. Emily had indeed loved anything that glittered, a magpie attraction to shiny objects that I'd always teased her about. I chalked it up to coincidence, a child's conflation of pleasant associations, or perhaps Lily retained a clearer memory of her mother's preferences than I gave her credit for. She'd only been 3.5 when the accident happened. "That's nice, Lily Bug," I said, forcing a warmth into my voice that felt a size too small. "Well, tell Sarah her taste is excellent." Sarah became a fixture in our quiet house. Lily recounted Sarah's opinions on her outfits. "Sarah says blue is my bestest color. Her food, Sarah doesn't like broccoli either, Daddy. And her bedtime stories, Sarah thinks the dragon was just misunderstood." I played along, asking after Sarah, including her in our good nights. It was, I told myself, a healthy coping mechanism for Lily, a way for her to process her world, perhaps even her mother's absence. I was an architect, used to solid foundations and predictable stresses. The fluid, often illogical world of a child's imagination was territory I navigated with a layman's map, hoping for the best. The first ripple of unease came a few weeks later. We were in the garden, a small patch of green Emily had coaxed into bloom with an almost magical touch. I was attempting to weed a particularly stubborn patch of dandelions, a task Emily had always tackled with cheerful determination. Lily was crouched beside me, helping, by meticulously examining ladybugs. "Sarah says Mommy used to sing to the roses here," Lily announced, her voice soft. "She sang that silly song about the bumblebee with a fuzzy tummy." I froze, my hand hovering over a dandelion. Emily had sung to the roses. And she did have a ridiculous, made-up song about a bumblebee, one she'd only ever sung when she thought I wasn't listening, a shy, private little melody. I'd only overheard it a handful of times, catching snippets from the kitchen window. Lily couldn't possibly remember that. She'd been too young, too engrossed in her own toddler world. "Did she now?" I managed, trying to keep my voice light. "That's a very specific thing for Sarah to know." Lily just nodded, already distracted by a ladybug taking flight. "Sarah knows lots of things about Mommy." I pulled the dandelion, its roots snapping with a small, unsatisfying sound. A coincidence, a lucky guess. Maybe I'd hummed the tune myself once, absent-mindedly, and Lily's sharp little ears had picked it up, her imagination weaving it into Sarah's narrative. Children were like sponges, weren't they? Soaking up details we adults barely registered. That had to be it. But the explanation felt thin, like tracing paper over something darker and more substantial. The unsettling details accumulated, like grains of sand forming an uncomfortable grit in the machinery of our daily life. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she said, "Sarah told me Mommy always wished for a little stream at the bottom of our garden, with tiny shiny fish." My breath caught. It was true. Emily had often spoken of that wish, a whimsical dream for our small suburban backyard. We discussed it late at night, sketching out impossible landscapes on napkins. It wasn't something we'd talked about in front of Lily. It was one of our private dreams, part of the future we'd been sketching together. "Sarah has a good imagination, sweetie," I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Her skin felt warm, her breathing soft and even. She was the picture of innocence. "It's not imagination, Daddy," Lily said, her eyes serious. "Sarah knows." I kissed her goodnight, the unease tightening in my chest. Downstairs, the silence of the house felt different, no longer just heavy, but listening. I walked through the rooms, Emily's presence, usually a comforting ache, now tinged with something else. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see, what? A shadow? A whisper? The rational part of my mind, the architect accustomed to blueprints and stress calculations, insisted on logic. Lily was processing grief. Sarah was a tool for that. Perhaps I'd spoken of these things more openly than I recalled. Grief did strange things to memory. I clung to these explanations, but they were beginning to feel like trying to plug a dam with my fingers. Then came the day the dam truly began to crack. It was a gray Saturday morning, rain lashing against the windows, mirroring the gloom that had become my constant companion. Lily was unusually quiet, sitting on the floor in the living room, a worn teddy bear clutched in her lap. She wasn't talking to Sarah, not out loud anyway. "What's wrong, Munchkin?" I asked, settling beside her. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. "Sarah's sad today," she whispered. "She's thinking about the bad day, when Mommy got hurt." A cold dread seeped into me. We rarely spoke of the bad day. I'd used euphemisms, when Mommy went to heaven, when Mommy became a star. I'd tried to shield Lily from the harsh realities, the twisted metal, the shattering glass, the awful finality of it. "Oh, sweetie," I began, reaching for her, but she pulled back slightly, her gaze distant. Sarah said Mommy was listening to her sunshine song. Lily said, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. And the other car was red, Daddy. A big, fast red car." The world tilted. Emily had a playlist she called her Sunshine Mix, full of upbeat, slightly cheesy songs she played to lift her spirits. I'd found her phone in the wreckage, the music app still frozen on a track from that very playlist. The police report, which I'd forced myself to read through a fog of pain, had stated the other vehicle was a dark blue sedan. I'd seen it myself, later, in the impound lot, a mangled heap of dark blue. Not red. Definitely not red. But then, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. The first officer on the scene, a young woman with haunted eyes, had made a comment, something I'd barely registered at the time, numbed as I was. She'd been talking to her partner, a garbled transmission of initial impressions. Something about, "looks like a red blur," came out of nowhere. Later, they'd clarified it was blue. Perhaps the light had been deceptive, or it was dirt and reflection. But that first, fleeting impression, red. How could Sarah, how could Lily, know that fleeting, mistaken detail? "Lily," I said, my voice hoarse. "Who told Sarah that? About the red car?" "Sarah just knows." Lily insisted, her eyes wide and earnest. She was worried about Mommy's special necklace, the one with the little silver bird. She said it fell off when the car went spinny. My heart hammered against my ribs. Emily had been wearing a delicate silver necklace with a tiny bird charm, a gift from her grandmother. It was one of her most treasured possessions. When I'd identified her belongings, the necklace was missing. The police thought it might have been lost at the scene, perhaps thrown clear or embedded somewhere in the wreckage, or even, they delicately suggested, taken. It wasn't listed on the inventory of items recovered from the car. I'd never told Lily about that necklace in the context of the accident. I'd barely been able to think about it myself, another small, sharp piece of loss. I stared at my daughter, this small child who was channeling information she could not possibly possess. The rain beat a frantic rhythm on the roof. The room felt cold, the familiar comfort of our home suddenly alien. "Lily," I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, "what else does Sarah say about Mommy's necklace?" Lily frowned, concentrating. "She says it's okay. It didn't get broken. It's just sleeping under the big green leaves near the sleepy tree." The accident had happened on a rural road, bordered by dense woods. One of the officers had mentioned her car had ended up near a large, distinctive oak tree, one that had shed most of its leaves for the autumn but was surrounded by hardy, broad-leafed undergrowth. A sleepy tree, green leaves. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a child's imagination. This was something else, something impossible. My architectural mind, trained to see patterns and structures, saw a horrifying design beginning to emerge, its foundations laid in something I couldn't comprehend. The logical explanations were not just failing, they were crumbling into dust, and in their place, a chilling, irrational fear began to take root. Sarah wasn't just an imaginary friend. Sarah knew too much. The days that followed were draped in a new kind of anxiety. I watched Lily constantly, my focus narrowed, every interaction with her unseen companion scrutinized. Sarah's presence, once a whimsical addition to our twosome, now felt like an intrusion, a silent, knowing observer in our most private moments. Lily, oblivious to my internal turmoil, continued her conversations with Sarah, her innocent chatter now laced with a chilling resonance for me. I began to subtly probe. "What does Sarah look like, Sweet Pea?" I'd ask, feigning casual curiosity. Lily's descriptions were frustratingly vague, almost contradictory. One day, Sarah was tall with hair like sunshine, an echo of Emily, perhaps. The next, Sarah was small, with whispery hair and eyes, like shiny stones. Sometimes Sarah wore dresses. Other times she had sparkly wings like a real fairy. The only consistent detail was Sarah's knowledge, a wellspring of information that seemed to grow deeper and more unnervingly accurate. "Sarah says Mommy loved the little cafe by the bookshop, the one with the wobbly tables," Lily announced one afternoon while we were building a precarious tower of blocks. She always ordered the lemon cake, even when she said she shouldn't. It was true. A tiny detail, a shared secret between Emily and me. We'd discovered the cafe on a rainy Saturday, much like this one. Emily had a sweet tooth she perpetually tried to curb, and that lemon cake was her favorite indulgence. Lily had never been there. I'd never spoken of it to her. My attempts at rationalization grew more desperate, more convoluted. Had Emily kept a diary? One that Lily somehow found and, with the prodigious, almost photographic memory of early childhood, absorbed details from? I searched Emily's belongings, her old writing desk, boxes of keepsakes I hadn't yet been able to face sorting through. I found letters, old notebooks filled with her beautiful, looping script, sketches, but no diary detailing these specific trivialities, nothing that could explain Lily's uncanny knowledge. The song, that was the detail that gnawed at me. Mommy was listening to her Sunshine song, Lily had said. How could Sarah know what was playing on Emily's phone at the precise moment of impact? The police report hadn't mentioned it. I only knew because I'd held that shattered phone in my hand, its screen, a spiderweb of cracks, the music app frozen mid-song. A song about improbable happiness, a cruel counterpoint to the reality of that day. I started to question my own sanity, my own memory. Had I, in my grief, spoken these things aloud, thinking I was alone? Had Lily, with her child's uncanny ability to absorb the unspoken, pieced together a mosaic of my sorrow? I became meticulous, almost obsessional, retracing my steps, replaying conversations in my mind. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had guarded these details fiercely, locking them away even from myself sometimes. The red car, the initial mistaken report, that was a fleeting comment between officers, something I'd only peripherally registered in my shock. The necklace, its loss, a private ache. The song, a silent, terrible discovery I'd shared with no one. The architect in me, the part that relied on precision and verifiable data, was reeling. The foundations of my understanding of reality were shifting, threatening to give way entirely. Sarah was not a product of Lily's imagination. Sarah was something else, something that had access to the inaccessible. Sarah's influence, once benign, began to take on a subtle, unsettling edge. It wasn't overtly malicious, not yet, but it was manipulative. "Sarah says you look sad, Daddy," Lily would tell me, her brow furrowed with concern. "She says it's because you don't play the dancing game with Mommy anymore." The dancing game had been a silly ritual Emily and I had, twirling each other around the kitchen while cooking. A memory so precious, so private, its invocation by this unseen entity felt like a violation. Or, "Sarah says I shouldn't eat my carrots. She says Mommy let her have cookies before dinner sometimes." Emily had been a stickler for healthy eating. Cookies before dinner were a rare, celebratory treat, not a regular occurrence. It was a small thing, a child testing boundaries, but the source of the suggestion, Sarah, made it sinister. It felt like an attempt to drive a wedge, however small, between Lily and me, using Emily's memory as the lever. I considered seeking professional help, taking Lily to a child psychologist, but what would I say? My daughter's imaginary friend knows intimate details about my dead wife's accident. Details she couldn't possibly know. I could already imagine the carefully neutral expression on the therapist's face, the gentle suggestions of shared grief, of Lily's sensitivity to my own unspoken sorrow. They would try to rationalize it, to fit it into known psychological frameworks, and I would sound unhinged. The fear of being dismissed, of not being believed, was a powerful deterrent. It pushed me further into a lonely orbit of fear and confusion. This was my burden, my terror. I couldn't inflict my burgeoning paranoia on Lily by making her a subject of therapy for something she perceived as normal and comforting. The isolation was a creeping frost. I found myself withdrawing, conversations with friends and family becoming more superficial. How could I share this? Who would understand? The few times I'd vaguely alluded to Lily having a very vivid imaginary friend, I'd been met with fond, knowing smiles and anecdotes about their own children's imaginative phases. It only served to highlight the chasm between their normal and my terrifyingly abnormal. Then came the revelation that shattered the last vestiges of my denial. It was late. Lily was asleep, her face serene in the soft glow of her nightlight. I was in my study, ostensibly working on a blueprint for a community center, but my mind was far from soffits and load-bearing walls. I was staring at a framed photograph of Emily, her smile radiant, her eyes full of the life that had been so cruelly extinguished. A small sound made me turn. Lily stood in the doorway, her favorite teddy bear clutched to her chest, her eyes wide and unfocused. Sleepwalking was rare for her, but not unheard of. "Lily, Bug, you okay?" I asked softly, getting up to lead her back to bed. She didn't respond to her name. Her gaze was fixed on something beyond me. "She was scared," Lily said, her voice flat, eerily devoid of her usual childish inflection. It was a monotone, almost older. "So scared. It hurt. Right here." She touched her temple, her small fingers pressing against the soft skin. A cold wave washed over me. I had forced myself to read the coroner's report. Emily had sustained multiple injuries, but the primary cause of death, the unrecoverable blow, had been to the left temporal bone. A detail so clinical, so brutal, I had locked it away in the deepest vault of my mind. A detail I had certainly never, ever breathed aloud, not to Lily, not to anyone except the hushed confines of my own nightmares. "Lily," I choked out, my blood running cold. "Who told you that?" Her eyes focused on me, but they didn't seem like Lily's eyes. There was an emptiness in them, a chilling vacancy. "Sarah knows," she said, the voice still flat, still wrong. Sarah was there. Sarah always is. Then, as quickly as it came, the strangeness passed. Lily blinked, her eyes clearing. She looked confused, disoriented. "Daddy, I had a bad dream." I scooped her into my arms, holding her tight, my own body trembling. The rational explanations were not just gone, they had been obliterated. This was not grief. This was not imagination. This was something active, something invasive, something that had been at the accident or had access to the very fabric of that horrifying event, down to the most clinical, terrible details. And it was now intimately connected to my daughter. I tried to record Lily when she was talking to Sarah, hoping to capture something, evidence, proof for myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I set up my phone to record audio discreetly during her playtime. The results were maddening. Sometimes, Lily would fall silent the moment I started recording, as if Sarah had warned her. Other times, the recordings would capture Lily's side of the conversation, her sweet, innocent voice, but when I played it back, the spaces where Sarah's responses should have been were filled with nothing but a faint, almost imperceptible hiss, like static on a distant radio station. Or worse, the recordings would be inexplicably corrupted, files refusing to open, or dissolving into digital noise. Technology, my reliable architectural software, my always functional phone, seemed to stutter and fail around this phenomenon. The fear was no longer a creeping unease. It was a constant, thrumming presence, a baseline hum beneath the surface of my days. My professional competence, my ability to think logically and solve problems, felt utterly useless against this thing. I was an architect facing a structure built from smoke and whispers, a blueprint drawn in a language I didn't understand. The ordinary world, with its predictable physics and stable realities, was beginning to feel like a thin veneer over something vast, dark, and terrifyingly irrational. And Sarah, whatever Sarah was, had peeled back a corner of that veneer, just for me and Lily. I knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in my veins, that I had to confront this Sarah, not as a figment of Lily's imagination, but as an entity. I had to understand what it was, what it wanted. The pretense of normalcy was over. My primary role, my most fundamental design, was that of a father. And I would protect my daughter, whatever the cost. The investigation had truly begun, not into Emily's death, but into the nature of the presence that clung to its memory. The decision to confront Sarah directly wasn't born of bravery, but of a gnawing, desperate fear. Lily was becoming more subdued, her natural effervescence dimming. There were shadows under her eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from a weariness that didn't belong on a 5-year-old's face. When she spoke of Sarah now, it was less with the bright enthusiasm of sharing a delightful secret and more with a kind of resigned acceptance, as if Sarah's presence was a weight she was learning to carry. I chose a quiet afternoon, when the house was still and the light outside was beginning to fade, casting long, melancholic shadows. Lily was in her room, humming softly to her dolls. I sat on the edge of her bed, my heart a trapped bird against my ribs. "Lily, bug," I began, trying to sound calm, casual. "Can I talk to Sarah for a moment? Through you?" Lily looked up, her expression unreadable. She nodded slowly, then her eyes unfocused slightly, that subtle shift I'd come to dread. It was as if she receded, making space for something else. "Sarah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can you hear me?" A pause, then Lily's head tilted. When she spoke, her voice was different. It was still recognizably Lily's, but overlaid with a faint resonance, a subtle cadence that was older, more deliberate. It was like listening to a perfectly tuned instrument played by an unfamiliar hand. "I always hear," the voice said. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. The architect in me needed data, facts, however unsettling. "I am a friend," came the reply, smooth and uninflected. "I look after Lily. I knew her mother." "You know things about her mother," I corrected. "Things no one else knows. Things even I barely knew. How?" The Lily Sarah entity smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips that was utterly alien on my daughter's face. "Memories are strong, stronger than you think. They linger, like perfume in an empty room." "Were you there?" I pressed. "At the accident?" "I am where strong feelings are," the voice said, evasively. "Joy, love, fear, grief." Emily felt many strong things. My skin crawled. This wasn't just an echo, it was something that fed on, or resonated with, intense emotion. "You know about her necklace," The silver bird. Lily said it was sleeping under green leaves. What did you mean? It is safe, the voice replied, as she would have wanted. Near the old oak. The roots hold it. This was new. Not just that it was lost, but a specific location, near the roots of the oak tree from the accident scene. An image flashed in my mind. The police cordon, the churned earth, the dense undergrowth. Could it still be there? You seem to know Emily's thoughts, her private wishes, I said, my voice tight. The stream she wanted in the garden, the lemon cake, her songs. She was very clear, the voice said almost wistfully. Her mind was a bright place. Then, a chilling addition. Even at the end, she thought of you, and Lily. A very bright, quick thought, like a flare. This was an intimate violation. To have Emily's last, private thoughts described by this thing speaking through my daughter was unbearable. What do you want, Sarah? I demanded, my control fraying. Why are you here? The smile returned, wider this time, and utterly devoid of warmth. To help Lily remember, to keep Emily close. Isn't that what you want? The mimicry was perfect, insidious. It was using my own grief, my own longing, as a justification for its presence. That's not helping, I said, my voice rising. You're upsetting her. You're telling her things a child shouldn't know. Knowledge is not upsetting, the voice countered smoothly. Secrets are. Emily had secrets too, you know. Small ones, like the bluebird she found, with the broken wing. She kept it in a shoebox in her closet for a week when she was a girl, cried when it died. I stared, dumbfounded. Emily had never told me that story. It was a fragment of her childhood, a secret she'd kept. How could this entity know such a trivial, long-buried detail? It wasn't just accessing facts about the accident, it was delving into Emily's entire life, her deepest memories. The implications were staggering. Was this an aspect of Emily's spirit, twisted and amplified, or something that had, in her final moments, imprinted on her entire existence? Leave her alone, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Leave my daughter alone. The smile vanished. Lily's face contorted, just for a second, into an expression of cold, ancient anger. The resonant quality in her voice deepened. Lily needs me. You are insufficient. You let Emily go. The accusation struck me like a physical blow. Guilt, a constant companion, flared, but beneath it, anger surged. This thing was twisting everything. Get out, I said, standing up. Get out of my daughter. Lily's eyes, now definitely not her own, narrowed. I am not in her. I am with her. There is a difference. Then, Lily slumped forward, her body suddenly limp. I caught her, her breath coming in soft gasps. Her eyes fluttered open, her own confused, scared gaze meeting mine. Daddy, she whispered, clinging to me. Sarah was angry. I held her tight, a storm of emotions raging within me. Terror, fury, and a desperate, protective love. The confrontation had yielded some answers, but each one opened a new abyss of horrifying questions. Sarah was intelligent, articulate, and deeply, unnervingly connected to Emily's memories, perhaps even her consciousness, and it believed it had a right to be here. My investigation broadened. I became a man obsessed. During the day, I was Dad, the architect, going through the motions of work and childcare. But at night, after Lily was asleep, I delved into the darkness. I started with Emily's accident. I obtained a copy of the full police report again, poring over every detail, every witness statement, every photograph. The officer's initial red blur comment wasn't officially noted, just a fragment of my own memory from the scene. The missing necklace was listed as personal effects not recovered. The oak tree, sleeping under the big green leaves near the sleepy tree, near the roots. The accident had occurred in late October. The undergrowth would have been dying back then, but some hardy perennials, ferns, or ivy might have remained green. I found the location on a map, a lonely stretch of county road, about 40 minutes from our house. The thought of going back there filled me with a visceral dread, but Sarah's words were a specific, testable claim. Before I could bring myself to revisit that haunted place, I researched. I typed Entity mimics dead loved one into search engines. Imaginary friend knows impossible details. Grief entity. The results were a strange mix of paranormal forums, folklore archives, and skeptical debunking sites. Most of it felt far-fetched, sensationalized. But then I found a few obscure academic papers, anthropological studies on grief rituals, and spirit beliefs in isolated cultures. Some mentioned memory eaters or echo spirits, entities believed to attach themselves to places of intense emotional trauma or to individuals consumed by loss, drawing sustenance from the lingering psychic residue. They were often described as mimics, reflecting back the deceased's traits, but subtly distorted, their comfort ultimately deceptive and parasitic. The descriptions were chillingly familiar. Was Sarah one of these? An ancient presence, drawn to the psychic shockwave of Emily's sudden violent death? An entity that had latched onto Lily's grief and my own, weaving itself into the fabric of our sorrow? The term stalker horror from some of these forums resonated. This thing was observing, learning, integrating itself into our lives with terrifying patience. One evening, while Lily was ostensibly playing with her dolls, I heard her say, "No, Sarah, Daddy won't like that. It's his special remembering box." I walked into her room to find her standing before my closet, where I kept a wooden box filled with Emily's most personal belongings. A few favorite books, letters, a pressed flower from our first anniversary, things I couldn't bear to part with but couldn't yet look at without a fresh wave of pain. Lily had never shown any interest in that box before. She had never even known what was in it. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked gently. "Sarah wanted to see Mommy's sparkly scarf," Lily said, pointing to the box. "She said it's in there, with the white feather." My blood turned to ice. There was indeed a scarf in that box, one Emily loved, shot through with silver threads. And tucked beside it, a single white feather we'd found on a walk, a silly little memento. No one, absolutely no one, knew those specific items were in that specific box together except me. I had packed it myself, in the numb days after the funeral. This wasn't just memory. This was an intrusion into my most private, sacred spaces. Sarah wasn't just connected to Emily. It was connected to the grief itself, to the objects that held its charge. I began to look at our house differently. Was it tied to this place, where Emily had lived, where our grief was most concentrated? Or was it tied specifically to Lily, or to me? The professional accuracy I prided myself on in architecture felt mocked by this shapeless, rule-breaking horror. I started discreetly asking around, talking to older residents in our town, feigning an interest in local history and folklore. I visited the local historical society, searching for any unusual accounts, any hidden histories that might offer a clue. I found tales of old tragedies, disappearances in the nearby woods, but nothing that directly mirrored our experience. No specific warnings about entities that impersonated the dead or spoke through children. The institutional memory seemed blank on this particular terror. One night, I dreamt of Emily. She was standing in our garden, bathed in soft light, but her face was obscured by shadow. She was trying to tell me something, her voice urgent but too faint to hear. I woke with a profound sense of her presence, but also a deep, chilling understanding. This was not Sarah. This was Emily, or my memory of her, and it felt pure, untainted. Sarah felt other, a cold, intelligent mimicry. The need to go to the accident site became imperative. I had to know if Sarah's claim about the necklace was true. It was a concrete piece of information, something I could verify or disprove. If it was there, it meant Sarah's knowledge was not just abstract, but physically accurate in the real world. It meant this entity could perceive, or had perceived, tangible reality. I told Lily I had an important errand to run. I left her with Mrs. Henderson, our kind elderly neighbor, a woman whose comforting ordinariness felt like an anchor in my increasingly unmoored world. The drive out to that county road was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every landmark was a fresh stab of pain, the curve where she would have seen the other car, the stand of pines she would have passed just seconds before. The oak tree was still there, massive and indifferent, its branches bare against the winter sky. The undergrowth was sparse now, mostly withered stalks and decaying leaves. The area had an air of desolation, of a wound poorly healed. I got out of the car, my breath misting in the cold air. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. I walked towards the base of the oak, my heart pounding. Near the roots, Sarah had said. I scanned the ground, my eyes searching for any glint of silver, any disturbance in the leaf litter. It felt like a fool's errand. So much time had passed. Weather, animals. And then I saw it. Tucked beneath a thick, gnarled root, almost hidden by a patch of stubborn, winter-green ivy, was a small, metallic object. My hand trembled as I reached for it. It was caked in dirt, but as I brushed it away, I saw the unmistakable shape of a tiny bird, its wings outstretched. Emily's silver necklace. I sank to my knees, the cold, damp earth seeping into my jeans. It was real. Sarah hadn't just known about it, she knew where it was. The implications were terrifying. This entity had a direct, verifiable link to the physical events of that day. It wasn't just a memory echo, it was a witness, or something that had scavenged the scene with an impossible perception. Holding the delicate, dirt-stained charm in my palm, I felt a new resolve harden within me. I was no longer just scared or confused. I was facing an opponent, an intelligent, invasive presence that had embedded itself in our lives. My investigation had confirmed the impossible. Now, I had to understand its nature, its vulnerabilities. And I had to fight it. For Lily, for Emily's memory, for the very sanity of our existence. The family protector in me, the architect who built things to shield and endure, was fully awake. This thing had trespassed, and I was going to evict it. The discovery of the necklace at the accident site changed everything. It was the irrefutable, physical proof that Sarah was not a figment of grief-fueled imagination, but an entity with access to real-world, specific knowledge tied to Emily's death. The cold dread I'd felt previously now began to coalesce into a grim determination. I had to protect Lily, not just from distressing information, but from a presence that was clearly more than just an echo. Its influence on her was becoming more pronounced, more concerning. Lily started to exhibit behaviors that were subtly, yet distinctly, un-Lily-like. She, who had always been an open, affectionate child, became more withdrawn, often staring into space with that same unnerving blankness I'd seen when Sarah was most dominant. She developed a new, quiet stubbornness. If I asked her to do something she didn't want to, she'd sometimes whisper, "Sarah says I don't have to," her tone flat, her eyes holding a flicker of something cold and defiant that wasn't her own. Small items began to go missing from my desk, pens, a paperweight, even a small framed photo of Emily I kept there. They would later turn up in Lily's room, tucked away in her dollhouse or under her pillow. When I asked her about it, she'd say, Sarah wanted to look at them. She misses Mommy too. It felt like a deliberate campaign to unnerve me, to assert Sarah's presence and its claim on Emily's memory, and, by extension, on us. The nature of Sarah's communication, channeled through Lily, also began to shift. The earlier, almost wistful pronouncements about Emily were increasingly replaced by more direct, sometimes unsettling statements. One evening, as I was reading Lily a bedtime story, she suddenly looked up, her eyes unfocused. "Sarah says you shouldn't have painted the kitchen yellow," she stated, her voice taking on that familiar, slightly resonant quality. Emily wanted blue, a soft, sky blue. Emily and I had briefly discussed painting the kitchen blue years ago, before settling on a cheerful yellow. It was a fleeting conversation, long forgotten by me until that moment. The accuracy was less surprising now than the intent. It felt like Sarah was actively trying to critique my life, to undermine my choices, using Emily's supposed preferences as a weapon. Well, Mommy and I decided on yellow together, and we both liked it, I said firmly, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Lily's expression hardened for a moment. "Sarah says Emily only agreed to yellow to make you happy. She always preferred blue." The implication was clear. I hadn't truly known my wife. I was failing her memory. This was the entity's new tactic, psychological warfare. It was attempting to erode my confidence, my peace of mind, my very sense of self in relation to Emily. The stalker horror aspect intensified. I felt constantly watched, judged, by this unseen presence that knew my past, my vulnerabilities. My research into obscure folklore and paranormal accounts continued with a new urgency. I found more scattered references to entities that attached to trauma, that mimicked loved ones, but most were vague, lacking specifics on how to deal with them. The common thread seemed to be that these things fed on strong emotions, grief, yes, but also fear, anger, turmoil. The more distressed the living were, the stronger the entity seemed to become. If that was true, then my own mounting fear and frustration were potentially fueling Sarah. I tried a few tentative countermeasures based on half-remembered folklore. I placed salt lines, discreetly, across Lily's windowsill and doorway. They seemed to have no effect. I even, in a moment of desperation, bought a small silver cross, placing it on Lily's bedside table. The next morning, it was on the floor, bent as if twisted by a small, strong hand. Lily, when asked, just said, "Sarah doesn't like it. It feels prickly." The failure of these simple warding attempts was disheartening. This was no common spirit easily deterred. The climax of this insidious campaign of psychological attrition, the point where Sarah's presence shifted from deeply unsettling to overtly menacing, came during a week of particularly bad weather. A storm had been raging for days, trapping us indoors, the wind howling like a mournful beast, the rain a constant, percussive assault on the roof and windows. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to amplify Sarah's influence. Lily was pale and quiet, her conversations with her unseen companion more frequent, more intense. One evening, the power flickered and died, plunging the house into a disorienting darkness, lit only by the emergency flashlight I kept in the kitchen. Lily, who was usually fairly brave in the dark, let out a small, terrified cry. I rushed to her, finding her standing in the middle of her room, trembling. "It's okay, sweet pea," I soothed, pulling her into a hug. "It's just a power outage. It'll be back on soon." "She doesn't like the dark," Lily whispered, her voice tight with fear. But she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on a shadowy corner of the room. "Who doesn't like the dark, Lily?" I asked, my own fear spiking. "Sarah?" Lily nodded, her small body rigid in my arms. Then, her head snapped up, her eyes wide, reflecting the erratic beam of my flashlight. The transformation was more pronounced than ever before. Her face seemed to sharpen, her expression becoming one of cold, imperious anger. The voice that came from her was no longer just Lily's with a subtle resonance. It was deeper, harsher, with an undeniably alien timbre. It was the voice of the mimic, dropping its pretense. "You cannot protect her from the dark," the voice rasped, each word like a shard of ice. "The dark is where truth resides. Emily knew that. She learned it in the end." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my arm tightening around Lily, shielding her, though I knew the threat was already inside, looking out through her eyes. "She was afraid," the voice continued, a cruel satisfaction lacing its tone. "When the lights of the other car pinned her, when the world fractured around her, she called out. Did you hear her?" "Stop it," I shouted, my voice cracking. This was torture, a deliberate, sadistic reliving of Emily's final moments. The entity laughed, a dry, rasping sound utterly horrifying coming from my daughter's throat. "You weren't there. You left her alone, just like you're leaving Lily alone with her fears. But I am here. I was there. I can show her what her mother felt, so she truly understands." Lily's small hand, impossibly strong, gripped my arm. Her eyes, or rather the eyes of the thing looking through them, burned into mine. "She needs to understand loss, true loss. Then she will appreciate what she has." The emphasis was chilling. This was its demand, its purpose, finally laid bare. It wasn't about comfort or remembering Emily. It was about control, about indoctrination, about twisting Lily's understanding of love and loss into something dark and dependent on it. It wanted to replace me, to become the central figure in Lily's life, using the trauma of Emily's death as its binding agent. It was trying to recreate the conditions of trauma, to make Lily as vulnerable and terrified as Emily had been, so it could then offer its twisted version of solace. "You will not harm her," I snarled, raw, protective fury surging through me. The architect was gone, the grieving husband was gone. Only the father remained, a primal force. "You will not touch her." "Harm?" The voice was laced with something that might have been amusement if it were capable of human emotion. I am offering understanding, connection. Emily is with me. Soon, Lily will be too. We will be a family. The sheer audacity, the perverse horror of that statement stole my breath. It wasn't just mimicking Emily, it was trying to subsume her, to create a grotesque parody of our family. In that moment, something shifted within me. The fear, while still present, was overshadowed by a cold, clear rage. This entity, this Sarah, was not just an intruder, it was a predator, and I would not let it have my daughter. I remembered my research. These things fed on strong emotion. My fear, my anger, my grief, they were its nourishment. I had to starve it. But how, when it was so deeply enmeshed with Lily? "You are not Emily," I said, forcing my voice to be calm, steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "You are a shadow, a parasite, and your time here is over." The entity recoiled, or rather, Lily's body flinched as if struck. The eyes narrowed. "You cannot banish what is part of you. You are not part of us," I stated, focusing all my will, all my love for Lily and Emily, into those words. "You are an echo of pain, and we are choosing to heal. We are choosing light, not your darkness." I looked directly into Lily's eyes, trying to reach my daughter past the invader. "Lily," I said, my voice softening, "I love you. Mommy loved you. What you feel, what this thing is making you feel, that's not love, that's fear, and we don't have to be afraid anymore." The flashlight beam caught something in the corner, Emily's silver-backed hairbrush on Lily's dresser, a mundane object, yet suddenly imbued with significance. Memories of Emily sitting at her vanity, brushing her long hair, humming softly. Memories of her teaching Lily how to brush her doll's hair. Simple, everyday moments of love and connection. "Remember Mommy, Lily?" I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Remember her laughing? Remember her songs, the real ones, the happy ones? Remember how she tucked you in, how she read you stories with all the funny voices?" I started to recount specific, cherished memories. The time Emily had tried to bake a birthday cake that ended up hilariously lopsided. The day we'd all danced in the rain in the backyard. Lily's squeals of delight. I painted pictures with words, vivid and warm, focusing on the joy, the love, the life that had been Emily. I was trying to overlay the entity's dark narrative with the truth of our happiness. As I spoke, I saw a flicker in Lily's eyes, a brief return of her own light. The harshness in her expression softened, confused. The entity's grip seemed to waver. The voice came again, but it was weaker now, more strained, still emanating from Lily but losing its terrifying depth. She is gone. Only the pain remains." "No," I insisted, holding Lily tighter, pouring all my conviction into my words. "The love remains. The joy remains. That's what we keep. That's what's real. You are just an imitation, a bad copy." I thought of the necklace, sleeping under the leaves, a piece of Emily, lost and then found. It represented the trauma, but also her enduring presence. I had it in my pocket, wrapped in a cloth. I hadn't known why I'd brought it upstairs with me, but now it felt like a talisman. "Emily wouldn't want this for you, Lily," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "She wouldn't want you to be scared, or to listen to this thing that pretends to be her friend but only wants to hurt you, to keep you in the sad places. She would want you to be happy, to be brave." Lily's body suddenly went rigid. A sound tore from her throat, a high-pitched keen that was pure anguish, but beneath it, something else. A discordant, inhuman shriek, like tearing metal, like a signal breaking up. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper, pressing in. The flashlight flickered wildly. "No," the alien voice shrieked, no longer through Lily's clear articulation but a distorted, layered sound. "The memories, they burn, too bright." Lily began to struggle in my arms, her small fists beating against my chest, not with the strength of a child, but with a desperate, frantic energy. It was a physical battle now, the entity fighting for its hold. "Let her go," I roared, not at Lily, but at the thing possessing her. "Lily, fight it, I'm here. Mommy is here, in our hearts. She's stronger than this thing. I closed my eyes, focusing on Emily, on our love, on Lily's bright spirit. I pictured Emily's smile, her laugh, her warmth, projecting it like a shield, like a weapon. I poured every ounce of love and positive memory I had into that mental space, trying to starve the entity of the fear and grief it craved, trying to overwrite its parasitic code with the pure data of our family's happiness. Lily let out a final shuddering cry, and then her body went limp. Not in the vacant way of Sarah's control, but with the genuine exhaustion of a child who had fought a terrible battle. The inhuman shriek cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The flashlight stabilized, its beam steady. The oppressive coldness in the room seemed to lessen, the shadows to recede. I held my breath, then Lily stirred. She coughed, a small, weak sound. Her eyes fluttered open, and this time, they were her own. Filled with confusion, exhaustion, but unmistakably Lily. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice frail. I had a really bad nightmare. She was so angry. She was loud. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry, real, heartbroken sobs of a terrified child. I held her, rocking her gently, tears streaming down my own face, tears of relief, of residual terror, of profound, aching love. "It's okay, sweet pea," I whispered into her hair. "It's over. The nightmare is over. Sarah's gone." I wasn't entirely sure if Sarah was truly, permanently gone, but in that moment, as Lily clung to me, her small body trembling but her spirit her own, I felt a profound shift. The oppressive presence that had haunted our lives, that had twisted our grief into a weapon, had receded. We had faced it not with salt lines or silver crosses, but with the fierce, unwavering power of love and memory, the true, untainted ones. The power chose that moment to surge back on, the lights flickering to life, chasing away the last of the deep shadows. It felt like an affirmation. The aftermath was quiet, almost unnervingly so. In the days and weeks that followed our confrontation in the storm-darkened room, the oppressive atmosphere in the house lifted, like a fever breaking. Lily slowly returned to her usual self, her laughter becoming more frequent, her natural brightness re-emerging, though she was more subdued than before, carrying a new, quiet thoughtfulness that hadn't been there prior to Sarah's intrusion. She never mentioned Sarah again, not once. It was as if that chapter, that terrifying entity, had been excised from her conscious memory, relegated to the realm of a particularly vivid nightmare, as she'd called it. I never pressed her, never brought up the name. There were wounds that needed to be left undisturbed to heal. We both carried scars, mine etched into my understanding of reality, hers, I hoped, shallower, more resilient to the passage of childhood. I, however, could not forget. The architect in me, the man who believed in structure and knowable laws, had been irrevocably altered. I now knew that the blueprints of our existence were drawn on a much larger, stranger canvas than I had ever imagined, that there were forces and entities that operated outside the neat lines of human comprehension. The world felt thinner, the veil between what was seen and unseen more permeable. The house, our home, slowly began to feel like ours again. The constant sense of being watched, of an intrusive presence, faded. The silence was no longer heavy with unspoken dread, but filled with the comfortable, ordinary sounds of our life together. Lily's chatter, the clink of dishes, the murmur of the television. Yet, for me, a certain vigilance remained, a heightened awareness of the shadows, a tendency to listen too closely to the quiet. I took Emily's necklace, the small silver bird, cleaned it carefully, and placed it in the wooden box with her other treasured belongings. It was no longer just a symbol of loss, but a reminder of a battle fought and, in some measure, won. It was a testament to the fact that even in the face of the incomprehensible, love and memory could be anchors, weapons even. I made a concerted effort to fill our lives with light, with new, happy memories. We took weekend trips, visited parks, had picnics, filled the house with laughter and silly songs, our own songs, not echoes of a shadowed past. I wanted to overlay any lingering residue of Sarah with an abundance of joy, to starve any potential return by removing the emotional sustenance it craved. There were still moments, of course, a particular slant of light, a forgotten scent, a turn of phrase from Lily that would echo something Emily might have said, and a jolt of anxiety would pass through me. Was it back? Was it listening? But these moments became fewer, their power diminishing over time. The dark resignation I had felt at the height of Sarah's influence began to recede, replaced by a cautious, determined optimism. I never sought professional help for what we'd experienced. Who would have believed me? The story was too outlandish, too far beyond the pale of accepted reality. It became my hidden history, a secret knowledge I carried. The institutional failure I'd perceived, the lack of any framework to understand or combat such a thing, meant I was on my own, and had been all along. But in that isolation, I'd found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, the strength of a father determined to protect his child against any threat, seen or unseen. My work as an architect took on a new dimension. I found myself thinking more about the emotional resonance of spaces, about creating environments that felt safe, nurturing, inherently resistant to darkness. My designs became, in subtle ways, affirmations of light and life. Lily grew, thrived. She made new friends, real ones, full of giggles and shared secrets that were entirely their own. Occasionally, she would mention an imaginary playmate, a fleeting fancy typical of her age, and a cold fist would clench in my stomach. But these figures were always benign, whimsical, lacking the chilling depth and impossible knowledge of Sarah. They were products of a healthy imagination, not an invasive entity. I never remarried. My love for Emily remained a cornerstone of my life, but it was no longer a raw, open wound for something like Sarah to infect. It became a source of strength, a warm memory that illuminated rather than shadowed our present. The grief was still there, a gentle ache, a part of who I was, but it no longer defined me or our home. The experience left an indelible mark. I knew that the familiar rules and logic of the world could, under certain pressures, break down. I knew that there were hidden histories all around us, unseen currents beneath the surface of everyday life. But I also knew the profound strength of human adaptability, the fierce, unyielding power of protective love. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and Lily was safely asleep, I would find myself looking out at the darkness beyond the window, a silent guardian. I knew we had faced something from beyond our understanding, something ancient and predatory. We had survived, not unscathed, but whole. Our small family unit, forged in love and loss, had endured. And in that endurance, in the quiet rhythm of our reclaimed lives, there was a victory. Sarah, or whatever it was, had shown me the terrifying fragility of our perceived reality, but it had also, inadvertently, shown me the unbreakable strength of the human heart and the enduring light of a father's love for his child. That, I knew, was a foundation nothing could ever truly shake.